Picture this. I roll up after 2 weeks on a remote job site, dusty boots and all, to find a full wedding takeover in my backyard. White tents, champagne fountain by my grill, 200 strangers trampling my lawn, bride's veil snagged in my prized tomato vines, 3-time county fair champ. HOA president in pearls marches over.
Sir, you're trespassing. Leave before you ruin the photos.
She told me to leave my house. Catering guy even hands me a slider like I'm crashing the party. What she didn't know, retired construction foreman here, with a 15-year-old demolition permit itching for use. I smiled, dialed my old crew on speed dial. What would you do? Call cops, smash the cake, or go bulldozer? Drop it below. Cops, cake, or bulldozer, plus where you're watching from. She had no idea I'd turn her perfect day into the biggest regret of her entitled life. Legally, spectacularly, and without mercy. My tomatoes? Still standing. This gets nuclear. Stick around. Let me back up 3 months to when this war started. My name's Hank Brewster, recently retired construction foreman, and I just inherited my grandmother's 1940s craftsman house in Willowbrook Estates after losing my wife Sarah to cancer. Moving here was supposed to be my fresh start, closer to my daughter's family, somewhere I could heal. The house sits on 2.3 acres, the biggest, most beautiful lot in the entire subdivision. While everyone else got crammed into quarter-acre postage stamps, Grandma's property kept its original farmland boundaries. Rolling green lawn, perfect for hosting events, mature oak trees providing natural shade, garden space that'd make a commercial nursery jealous. The smell of honeysuckle climbing my fence mixed with morning coffee from Grandma's old percolator. The satisfying crunch of gravel under my work boots as I walk the property line, planning renovations. The sound of wind chimes hanging from the oak tree where Sarah and I got married 20 years ago. Even the feel of original hardwood floors, solid as bedrock under my feet. Everything about this place screamed peace and possibility. Too bad my backyard screamed something else to the neighborhood vulture. Dollar signs. Enter Priscilla Blackthorne, 52-year-old HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood dictator. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair that never moved in wind, designer clothes that cost most people's car payments, drives a white BMW like she's personally delivering divine judgment. She's married to the subdivision developer's nephew and lives in the biggest house on the fancy cul-de-sac, where her kitchen window has a perfect view of my property. More importantly, she's a real estate agent who specializes in event planning consultation, whatever the hell that means. The harassment began my second week. I'm replacing Grandma's rotted deck boards when I hear the sharp staccato of stilettos on concrete. Priscilla marches up my driveway like she's serving a federal warrant, clipboard clutched like a weapon, measuring tape draped around her neck like a stethoscope. Mr. Brewster, your property violates 17 current subdivision standards. 17. She'd actually walked my entire lot with a ruler. The violation notice was a masterpiece of manufactured authority. Mailbox wrong style, $75 weekly. Fence 2 inches too tall, $100 weekly. Garden shed wrong color, $50 weekly. Driveway exceeds width specifications, $75 weekly. Each infraction carried escalating fines until corrected to HOA standards. Total weekly damage, $450 until I surrendered to her aesthetic dictatorship. These features existed before your HOA was even founded, I said, holding the paper that reeked of her expensive perfume. Grandfather clauses require proper documentation, filing within 60 days of covenant updates. Your grandmother failed to submit the paperwork in 2019. That smile could have frozen hellfire. Pay the fines, or we'll place a lien on the property. Here's what made my blood pressure spike. I spent the next weekend walking the subdivision with my own measuring tape. Priscilla's brother-in-law had an identical fence violation, no citations. Her realtor buddy had the same mailbox style, no fines. 3 newer residents had banned garden decorations covering their lawns. Somehow those violations were under review. But my 75-year-old features that predated every rule in her book, those were community cancer, requiring immediate amputation. The subdivision politics became crystal clear at monthly HOA meetings. Picture a middle school cafeteria where the mean girl holds court, except the mean girl has legal authority and a lawyer for a brother-in-law. 5 original homeowners like me faced constant harassment, while 47 newer properties got free passes for identical violations. "We need consistency in our community standards," Priscilla would announce from her throne at the community center, laser focused on us original residents sitting in the back like detention students. Some people think legacy status exempts them from progress. That's when I realized what this really was. A systematic squeeze-out campaign designed to force original homeowners to sell their larger properties to developers. Properties with enough space for, well, for hosting large events. Properties like mine, with the biggest backyard in the neighborhood and absolutely perfect sight lines from Priscilla's kitchen window. I should have connected those dots sooner. 2 weeks later, Priscilla escalated from harassment to full-scale warfare. I'm drinking my morning coffee on the back porch when her white BMW pulls up, followed by 2 other cars, like some kind of bureaucratic convoy. Out step 3 women with clipboards, measuring tapes, and cameras. The HOA equivalent of Navy SEALs, if SEALs wore designer heels and carried purses. "Good morning, Hank," Priscilla calls out, waving like we're old friends. "Time for your comprehensive property compliance assessment." The lead inspector, a sharp-faced woman who introduced herself as Sandra from Community Standards, immediately started photographing everything that cast a shadow. My fence, my shed, the spacing between my deck posts, even the bird feeder hanging from my oak tree. The mechanical click whir of her camera shutter, mixed with the relentless scratching of pens on clipboards as they documented every supposed transgression against suburban perfection. "Sir, this garden shed exceeds allowable square footage by 12%, Sandra announced, measuring my grandfather's tool shed that had weathered 75 Michigan winters without complaint. "And this driveway width violates current setback requirements," added Inspector Number 2, stretching her tape measure across concrete I'd poured with my own hands just last month. The smell of fresh mulch from my vegetable garden couldn't mask the stench of manufactured authority. These women were creating violations faster than a ticket quota cop on the last day of the month. Priscilla supervised from a safe distance, occasionally pointing out areas of concern, while her clipboard brigade did the dirty work. When they finished their documentation assault, she handed me a manila envelope thick enough to stop a bullet. "Congratulations, Hank. You've just set a new subdivision record. 23 violations. Everything from non-approved fence staining to unauthorized decorative elements. Apparently my American flag qualified as unsanctioned decoration. Total weekly fines, $1,847 until corrected, plus $200 in professional assessment fees for the privilege of being harassed on my own property. 30 days to achieve full compliance," Priscilla said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Otherwise, we file a lien and begin foreclosure proceedings." That's when something my old foreman taught me echoed in my head. When someone's trying this hard to screw you, they're probably screwing themselves too. He'd been talking about contractors who nitpicked every detail to hide their own shoddy work, but the principle seemed relevant. So that afternoon, I decided to conduct my own property assessment. Armed with my measuring tape and camera, I took a leisurely walking tour of Willowbrook Estates to see what violations Sandra's eagle eyes might have missed elsewhere. The results were absolutely stunning. House 47 had an identical fence, same height, same stain, same setback violations, but somehow 0 citations. The corner house where the developer's cousin lived featured a driveway actually wider than mine and decorative fence extensions that clearly violated every height restriction on the books. 0 violations on record. But the real comedy gold was Priscilla's own house. Her rear addition sat 18 inches closer to the property line than regulations allowed. Her decorative fence exceeded height limits by 4 full inches. She had unauthorized landscape lighting that would have made Las Vegas jealous, plus a hot tub installation that violated every setback rule in her own enforcement manual. Total violations for the HOA president's property, 0. Apparently, the rules were more like guidelines when your name was on the letterhead. I spent the next weekend creating what I privately called the Willowbrook Violations Database. GPS coordinates, measurements, photographs, and violation codes organized in a spreadsheet that would have made my old project managers proud. Then I remembered something from my contractor days. Municipal inspectors hate selective enforcement almost as much as they hate bad coffee. It makes their job harder and opens them up to discrimination lawsuits. So I filed a formal complaint with the city planning department, documenting 43 identical violations across the subdivision that had been enforced based on one criterion: whether you kissed Priscilla's ring or not. The crunch of gravel under the city inspector's truck tires 3 days later was sweeter than Christmas morning. Mr. Rodriguez, a 30-year veteran of municipal code enforcement, spent 4 hours documenting what I'd already discovered. When he finished, he closed his official notebook with the satisfied snap of someone who'd found exactly what he was looking for. "Mr. Brewster, this is textbook selective enforcement," he said. "In 30 years, I've never seen violations this blatantly discriminatory. Someone's weaponizing municipal codes for personal vendettas." Within a week, I received official notification. All HOA violations issued in the past 6 months were suspended pending investigation. All fines were voided. All foreclosure threats were declared null and void. The beautiful irony? Priscilla received her own violation notice for that 18-inch setback violation. Turns out municipal inspectors measure everyone with the same ruler once you get their attention. But I should have known this victory was temporary. Women like Priscilla Blackthorne don't retreat after the first counterattack. They regroup, call reinforcements, and come back swinging harder. Priscilla's revenge came with a $3,000 suit and a briefcase full of legal threats. Marcus Blackthorne, Esquire, her brother-in-law, and the HOA's attack dog showed up at my door like he was serving a federal warrant. The sharp bite of his expensive cologne couldn't mask the smell of desperation as he handed me an envelope thick enough to stop a bullet. "Mr. Brewster, you're being served with a cease and desist order. My advice? Comply immediately, or this gets very expensive very fast." The letter was pure legal intimidation porn. Apparently, my systematic harassment of board members constituted defamation, stalking, and interference with legitimate business operations. They wanted me to stop photographing violations, cease all contact with city officials, and submit to mediated resolution overseen by, surprise, Blackthorne Legal Services at $400 per hour. The threats escalated beautifully. Legal fees that would exceed your property value, foreclosure proceedings that would destroy your credit permanently, and criminal harassment charges that could result in jail time. Marcus delivered each threat with the cold precision of a mortician measuring a coffin. After he left, trailing expensive cologne and cheaper intimidation tactics, I called my daughter Lisa. She's a mortgage broker who deals with real estate lawyers daily and has a sixth sense for legal bullshit. "Dad, read me that letter word for word." Her laughter started as a snort and built to full belly laughs that echoed through my phone. "Dad, this is amateur hour intimidation. But here's what's weird. Why is a small HOA burning through serious legal fees over mailbox violations? Something doesn't add up." That question gnawed at me all night. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse to follow the money trail. After 3 decades managing construction budgets, I knew that financial records never lie. People do. What I found in the public records made my blood pressure spike. Willowbrook Estates HOA had paid $67,000 in legal fees over 18 months, all to Blackthorne Legal Services. No competitive bidding, no board approval votes in the meeting minutes, just a blank check operation that would make a mob accountant proud. But then I struck pure gold. While researching the original HOA and corporation documents from 1978, I discovered something that changed everything. My property wasn't even legally included in their jurisdiction. The original survey had screwed up the boundary lines, placing my 2.3-acre lot in the adjacent county township instead of the subdivision proper. For 40 years, I'd been paying HOA dues and following rules that legally didn't apply to my property. Priscilla had been running a protection racket on land she had no authority over. The musty smell of old documents in the courthouse basement mixed with my growing excitement as I photocopied every relevant survey map and incorporation filing. This wasn't selective enforcement anymore. This was fraud. I hired Mrs. Kowalski, a 73-year-old retired surveyor who'd worked on the original subdivision plat. She spent 2 days with her transit equipment, muttering Polish curses at whoever had botched the boundary work in the Carter administration. "Hank, your lot is definitely county jurisdiction, not township," she confirmed, tapping survey stakes that hadn't moved since disco was popular. These people have been collecting money and issuing violations for decades on property they don't legally control. Armed with this nuclear information, I filed a jurisdictional challenge with the county clerk and demanded the HOA provide documentation of their legal authority over my specific property, something they'd apparently never bothered to verify in 4 decades of operation. Marcus Blackthorne's response was swift and panicked. Instead of providing documentation, he filed an emergency motion claiming I was engaging in vexatious litigation and undermining legitimate community governance through frivolous technicalities. Translation in plain English: they had no documentation because they'd never checked their own legal authority. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire in August. 3 other original homeowners approached me privately with their own violation nightmares. Mrs. Patterson had paid $3,400 in fines for a pergola older than the subdivision. Mr. Ryan faced foreclosure threats over a garden shed that predated every rule in their book. Each had been told the same thing: pay up or lose everything. That's when the beautiful irony hit me. While threatening me with legal consequences, Priscilla and Marcus had been systematically extorting elderly homeowners using authority they didn't legally possess. Every fine, every threat, every legal fee, all based on jurisdiction they'd never bothered to verify. The sound of evening crickets mixing with distant highway traffic provided the perfect soundtrack as I planned my counterattack. These people thought they could bury me in legal paperwork and intimidation tactics, but they'd made one catastrophic mistake. They'd picked a fight with someone who actually reads the fine print, and the fine print was about to destroy their entire operation. Time to see how tough they were when fighting on an actual level playing field, instead of their imaginary legal kingdom. Priscilla's next move was pure social warfare, and it started with my morning newspaper disappearing for 3 straight days. When I finally caught the delivery guy, he apologized nervously and said he'd been redirected to skip my house due to neighbor complaints about noise disturbances. What noise? I was the quietest guy on the block. That's when I realized Priscilla had weaponized the entire neighborhood infrastructure against me. She'd formed something called the Willowbrook Community Standards Committee, basically a homeowner vigilante group dedicated to making my life miserable through 1,000 tiny cuts. The harassment was impressively coordinated. My trash pickup got, accidentally, skipped twice. The postal carrier started leaving packages at the wrong address because of address confusion. Even the lawn care service that handled half the subdivision suddenly couldn't find my house on their route schedule. But the real psychological warfare happened at social gatherings. The sharp whispers and sudden conversation stops when I walked past groups of neighbors chatting by their mailboxes. The way newer residents would cross the street rather than make eye contact. The community barbecue invitation that somehow never made it to my mailbox while reaching everyone else on my street. Priscilla had convinced 28 families that I was the neighborhood cancer threatening their property values. She'd done it by holding coffee meetings at her house, sharing selective financial information that made me look like a litigious maniac, costing everyone money in legal fees. We need to stand together against unreasonable behavior, she told anyone who'd listen. Property disputes like this affect all our home values. Some people think they're above community standards. The smell of her expensive coffee mixing with suburban gossip created the perfect atmosphere for turning neighbors into enemies. By month's end, I'd gone from friendly new resident to community pariah, all without throwing a single punch. But Priscilla made one critical mistake during her character assassination campaign. She got greedy. At the packed HOA meeting where she planned to publicly shame me into submission, she let slip some information that made my construction-trained brain start connecting dots. While explaining why legal fees had skyrocketed, she mentioned the association's need to protect our ability to host community events and maintain our reputation as a premier neighborhood venue. Venue. That word stuck in my head like a splinter. After the meeting, I decided to dig deeper into the HOA's event hosting activities. A quick search of the township's event permit database revealed something fascinating. Willowbrook Estates had filed for 17 special event permits in the past 2 years. Garden parties, anniversary celebrations, wedding receptions, all hosted on private community grounds with professional catering and parking coordination. The permits listed contact information for event coordination: Priscilla Blackthorne, Community Relations Director; My daughter Lisa, who'd been helping with financial research, took one look at the permit applications and started laughing. "Dad, this woman's running a side business using HOA resources. Look at these permit fees. She's charging people to use community space that's supposed to be free for residents." A deeper dive into public records revealed the beautiful scope of Priscilla's entrepreneurial empire. She'd incorporated something called Willowbrook Event Planning Services 18 months ago, with her home address as the business headquarters. The marketing materials, which I found cached on the internet, featured professional photographs of exclusive garden venues and private estate settings. The photographs showed my backyard, not similar backyards, not generic landscape shots. My actual oak tree, my specific fence line, my custom deck that I'd built with my own hands. She'd been using photos taken during her compliance inspections to market my property as a wedding venue rental. The audacity was breathtaking. This woman had been photographing my private property under the guise of HOA enforcement, then using those images to advertise event space she didn't own, couldn't legally access, and had no right to rent to strangers. But the real smoking gun came from the business insurance filings. Priscilla had purchased liability coverage for private estate event hosting that specifically listed my address as a covered venue location. She'd been collecting deposits and booking events on my property while I was completely unaware. The sound of my own heart pounding mixed with the evening crickets as I sat on my porch, staring at insurance documents that proved systematic fraud. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. This was criminal theft, stealing my property's commercial value while using her official position to photograph and access what she was planning to rent. That night, I called Mrs. Kowalski with an urgent request. "I need you to research every event permit filed for this subdivision. Cross-reference them with property ownership records. I think we're about to discover that Priscilla's been running a wedding venue business using other people's backyards." Her Polish accent carried a note of grim satisfaction. "Hank, if what you're thinking is true, this woman just committed fraud on a scale that will make the evening news." The war had just escalated from neighborhood harassment to federal crime territory. The smoking gun didn't come from my research. It came from a 17-year-old kid named Tyler, who knocked on my door at 7 in the morning, holding a clipboard and looking nervous as hell. "Mr. Brewster, I'm with Enchanted Events Catering. We're here to start setup for the Peterson-Wilson wedding this Saturday. The bride's mom is freaking out because we can't find the electrical hookups for the sound system." I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee mug halfway to my lips, staring at this kid who was talking about a wedding in my backyard like it was the most normal thing in the world. "What wedding?" Tyler's face went white. The wedding? This Saturday? 200 guests? We've got the contract right here for Willowbrook Manor Estate. He showed me a professional event contract with my address clearly printed at the top. The sharp smell of panic sweat mixed with his cheap cologne as the reality hit both of us simultaneously. This kid thought he was setting up at a legitimate venue. I was looking at evidence of massive fraud. "Son, this is my house. Nobody authorized any wedding here." Tyler's hands started shaking as he fumbled through his paperwork. "But we already delivered the rental chairs yesterday. The tent company is coming at noon. The bride's family paid $15,000 for exclusive venue access. $15,000 for my backyard. While I had no idea it was even happening, I invited Tyler inside and poured him coffee while he called his supervisor. The conversation I overheard made my blood pressure spike into stroke territory. Apparently, Enchanted Events had been working with Willowbrook Event Planning Services for over a year, catering dozens of events at private estate venues throughout the subdivision. When Tyler hung up, his face was the color of week-old lettuce. "Mr. Brewster, my boss says we've got contracts for 3 more events here next month. A corporate retreat, an anniversary party, and another wedding. Total value, $43,000 in bookings." That's when Mrs. Kowalski arrived for our morning coffee, took one look at the catering paperwork spread across my kitchen table, and started laughing like someone who just watched their enemy step on a landmine. "Hank, this is beautiful. She's not just committed fraud. She's created a paper trail with multiple businesses, signed contracts, and insurance liability. This woman has documented her own crimes in triplicate." The evidence Tyler provided was devastating. Professional event contracts listing my property as Willowbrook Manor Estate. liability waivers signed by hundreds of wedding guests who'd celebrated on stolen property, insurance claims filed for damages to venues Priscilla didn't own, even credit card processing records showing thousands in venue rental payments flowing to her personal accounts. But the real power shift came when Tyler made another call, this time to the Peterson family, to explain why their dream wedding was about to become a legal nightmare. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, and I could hear the bride's mother screaming through the phone from across the room. "They're threatening to sue us for the deposits," Tyler said when he hung up. "But they're also talking about pressing criminal fraud charges against whoever sold them a venue that doesn't exist." Mrs. Kowalski pulled out her phone and started recording. "Tyler, I need you to repeat everything you just told us, on camera, for the police report we're filing this afternoon." As Tyler detailed Priscilla's systematic fraud operation, I realized the beautiful irony of the situation. Her months of harassment had been designed to drive me away so she could use my property commercially without interference. Instead, she'd given me front row seats to watch her entire criminal empire collapse in real time. The war was over. Priscilla just didn't know it yet. Saturday's wedding was going to be very educational for everyone involved. The moment Tyler drove away with his catering equipment and shattered faith in venue contracts, I sat on my porch with a beer and started planning the most beautiful destruction of my construction career. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protecting innocent families from financial ruin while giving Priscilla the public education she deserved. My phone buzzed with a text from my old demolition buddy, Jake Morrison. "Heard through the grapevine you might need some heavy equipment therapy. What's the situation?" I called him back, and the man's laughter when I explained the wedding venue fraud sounded like a diesel engine rumbling to life. "Hank, you magnificent son of a bitch, you're asking me to legally demolish someone's criminal operation using municipal authority? It's like Christmas, my birthday, and the 4th of July wrapped in one beautiful package." Jake had been handling emergency municipal repairs for 15 years, which gave him the legal authority to declare potential septic emergencies whenever unauthorized commercial activity might contaminate groundwater. All perfectly legitimate under county health codes, especially when concerned homeowners reported possible contamination from unpermitted large gatherings. "Saturday morning, 6 a.m. sharp," he promised. "I'll bring the biggest excavator that'll fit through your gate. Nothing says venue temporarily unavailable, like heavy machinery blocking the driveway." The sweet smell of diesel exhaust from Jake's preliminary site visit mixed with my growing excitement as we coordinated the technical details. Emergency septic inspections could legally shut down any property for up to 72 hours if contamination risks were identified. And hosting commercial events without proper sewage capacity definitely qualified as contamination risk. My daughter Lisa called with updates from her coordination with the Peterson family's attorney. "Dad, they're devastated, but cooperating fully with the fraud investigation. The bride's mother wants Priscilla arrested, the father wants his $15,000 back, and the bride just wants someone to pay for the therapy she's going to need." Lisa had also discovered something beautifully ironic. Priscilla's event planning business had never obtained basic commercial permits. No business license, no commercial insurance that actually covered the properties she was renting, no health department approval for large food service operations. She'd been running a completely unlicensed commercial operation using stolen venues. "Here's the legal beauty," Lisa explained. "When you operate an unlicensed business on property you don't own, every transaction becomes fraud. Every deposit becomes theft. Every event becomes criminal trespassing with commercial intent." Mrs. Kowalski arrived with coffee and coordination updates from her municipal connections. "Hank, building inspectors will be here at 7 a.m. for emergency structural assessment. Turns out hosting 200-person events on residential property requires commercial building permits, which your property obviously doesn't have." The building department had been very interested to learn that someone was hosting large commercial gatherings without proper structural engineering assessments. Residential foundations aren't designed for commercial event loads, and liability concerns required immediate official inspection. But the real strategic masterstroke came from my neighbor Rodriguez, who'd alerted Channel 7's Consumer Protection Unit about systematic venue fraud targeting elderly homeowners. "Brother, they're sending an investigative team Saturday morning to document the fraud in progress. Nothing exposes criminals like live television coverage. Thursday evening, I positioned security cameras around the property perimeter to document every aspect of the fraud attempt. The motion-activated system would capture anyone who entered my land without permission, creating permanent evidence of criminal trespassing for commercial purposes. The soft electronic hum of cameras activating mixed with evening cricket songs as I tested the recording angles. Friday brought final preparations that felt like loading ammunition for the most satisfying battle of my life. Jake delivered staging equipment behind my tool shed, concrete barriers, emergency signage, and a portable office trailer for the inspection coordination team. The sharp bang of metal equipment being positioned echoed across my yard like gunshots, announcing the coming war. The coordination timeline was beautiful in its precision. 6 a.m. excavation team arrival, 7 a.m. building inspectors, 8 a.m. health department officials, 8:30 a.m. Channel 7 news crew, 9 a.m. wedding vendor arrivals, expecting to access a venue that would be completely surrounded by official investigation activity. Every inspection was absolutely legitimate. My septic system genuinely needed evaluation after discovering unauthorized commercial use. The foundation required assessment for potential damage from repeated heavy event equipment. Health and safety regulations absolutely applied to unpermitted large gatherings. And consumer protection journalism was definitely public interest reporting. The plan's elegant simplicity made me smile as I reviewed the final checklist. Let Priscilla's fraud operation proceed exactly as scheduled, but surround it with so much legitimate official scrutiny that the criminal activity became impossible to ignore, excuse, or cover up. Saturday morning would feature 200 wedding guests arriving to find government inspectors, news cameras, and construction equipment documenting the systematic fraud that had funded Priscilla's lifestyle for 18 months. The smell of fresh coffee mixing with diesel exhaust from Jake's equipment created the perfect soundtrack for tomorrow's spectacular demolition of a criminal empire built on stolen backyards and forged authority. Priscilla Blackthorne was about to learn what happened when you pick a fight with someone who builds things for a living and knows exactly how to tear them down legally. Friday night at 11 p.m., my security system lit up like a Christmas tree. Through the infrared cameras, I watched 3 figures in dark clothing creeping across my lawn like the world's most incompetent burglars. The lead figure moved with a distinctive click of designer heels on grass. Even during breaking and entering, Priscilla couldn't abandon her signature footwear. She'd brought backup, 2 teenagers who moved like they'd rather be anywhere else, probably her son and his unfortunate friend, recruited for what she'd undoubtedly pitched as protecting our community investment. The soft electronic hum of recording equipment mixed with my own barely controlled laughter as I watched them attempt to sabotage Jake's excavation equipment. They tried removing hydraulic caps like they were changing light bulbs, poured what looked like sugar into the fuel tank, and even attempted to disconnect battery cables with kitchen utensils. The amateur vandalism was painful to watch, like observing someone try to disable a space shuttle with a butter knife and positive thinking. I could have stopped them immediately, but watching Priscilla destroy her own legal defense by escalating from fraud to felony vandalism was better than cable television. Sometimes the best strategy is providing your enemies with enough rope to hang themselves and a comfortable chair to stand on. Saturday morning brought a sheriff's deputy to my door at 5:30 a.m., carrying a temporary restraining order that made my coffee taste like liquid irony. Judge Patricia Milhouse, apparently Priscilla's golf partner, had signed an emergency order at 11 p.m. the previous night, prohibiting me from interfering with legitimate business operations conducted under valid commercial agreements. Mr. Brewster, you're prohibited from disrupting lawful commercial activity, the deputy read with the enthusiasm of someone reciting tax code. Violation could result in immediate arrest. The legal document was a masterpiece of creative writing. Priscilla had sworn under oath that she possessed valid contracts, proper insurance, and full legal authority to conduct commercial operations on designated community event space. She'd painted herself as a legitimate businesswoman, being harassed by a vindictive neighbor through frivolous municipal inspections. Deputy, can I show you something interesting? I handed him Tyler's catering contract with my home address clearly printed as the venue location. According to this restraining order, you're here to protect someone's right to trespass on my private property for profit. Watching his expression change from bureaucratic confidence to genuine bewilderment was like watching someone solve a Rubik's Cube in reverse. He spent 15 minutes on his radio with supervisors, trying to determine whether he should arrest me for violating a court order that protected criminal fraud. Meanwhile, Jake arrived with his crew, surveyed the vandalized equipment, and started laughing like someone who'd discovered their enemies were complete amateurs. "Hank, whoever did this has never seen real machinery. They tried to disable a Cat 320 excavator by loosening the air filter housing. It's like trying to stop a freight train by untying the conductor's shoelaces." The beautiful irony was that the sabotage had actually strengthened our legal position. Vandalized construction equipment on residential property constituted a legitimate safety emergency, requiring immediate professional assessment under county regulations. By 7 a.m., the coordination flowed beautifully, despite Priscilla's interference. Building inspectors documented genuine structural concerns about residential foundations handling commercial event loads. Health officials identified real contamination risks from unpermitted food service operations. The restraining order became evidence of obstruction when officials realized it was designed to prevent investigation of documented criminal activity. But Priscilla's most spectacular miscalculation came at 8 a.m., when Marcus Blackthorne arrived with an emergency judicial intervention, demanding suspension of all municipal inspections. He actually argued that safety regulations should be waived to protect his client's contractual obligations. The man stood in my driveway, designer suit immaculate despite the morning chaos, screaming into his phone at Judge Milhouse about prosecutorial overreach and interference with legitimate commerce. His voice carried across the neighborhood as he demanded judicial protection for what he still insisted was lawful business activity. Mrs. Kowalski, armed with coffee and her phone's video recorder, captured Marcus's increasingly frantic arguments. "Your Honor, these inspections clearly exceed municipal authority and constitute retaliatory harassment of my client's established commercial operations." When Channel 7's news van rounded the corner with cameras rolling, Marcus discovered the urgent need to be elsewhere immediately. Watching a $500 per hour attorney flee from reporters asking basic questions about venue rental fraud was better entertainment than anything Netflix had produced recently. The smell of morning coffee mixed with diesel exhaust and the intoxicating scent of a criminal conspiracy collapsing under its own weight. Every desperate countermove had made Priscilla's situation worse, creating additional felony charges while documenting her awareness of the criminal activity. Standing on my porch, watching municipal inspectors, news crews, and excavation equipment converge, while Priscilla's legal team abandoned ship, I realized the beautiful truth. Transparency is kryptonite to corruption, and sunlight is the world's most effective disinfectant. The first wedding guests would arrive in 45 minutes to discover their dream venue had become ground zero for a fraud investigation. Priscilla's final desperate gambit arrived at 8:30 a.m. in the form of 3 county commissioners, 2 state representatives, and enough political pressure to crush a small municipality. She'd spent Friday night calling in every favor, making every threat, and apparently promising every bribe necessary to shut down the investigation before the wedding guests arrived. Commissioner Bradley Walsh, a man whose campaign signs I'd seen in Priscilla's yard for 6 years running, marched across my lawn like he was personally delivering divine judgment. The sharp staccato of his dress shoes on gravel mixed with his booming voice as he announced that all municipal inspections were being temporarily suspended pending review of jurisdictional authority. "Mr. Brewster, you've caused enough trouble for our community," he declared, waving official-looking paperwork. "These frivolous complaints are wasting taxpayer resources and interfering with legitimate business operations." Behind him, State Representative Karen Duffy nodded along like a dashboard bobblehead, clearly uncomfortable, but committed to supporting her donor's emergency request. The sweet morning air carried the stench of political corruption as 5 elected officials tried to shut down a criminal investigation to protect their campaign contributors' fraud operation. But they'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. Channel 7's investigative team was already filming. What Priscilla didn't know was that my neighbor Rodriguez had done more than just contact local media. His activism network included investigative journalists from 3 different news organizations, plus a documentary filmmaker who specialized in municipal corruption cases. The consumer fraud story had evolved into a live expose of political interference with law enforcement. Reporter Sarah Ryan from Channel 7 stepped forward with her cameraman rolling, microphone ready for what would become the most watched local news segment of the year. Commissioner Walsh, are you ordering municipal inspectors to stop investigating documented fraud because the suspect contributed to your campaign? The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my neighbor's sprinkler system 2 houses away. Commissioner Walsh's face went through several color changes before settling on a shade that matched fresh concrete. This isn't, we're here to ensure proper jurisdictional procedures, he stammered, clearly unprepared to defend political interference on live television. That's when Mrs. Kowalski emerged from my house, carrying a banker's box full of financial documents, moving with the purposeful stride of someone about to detonate a political scandal. Commissioner Walsh, I have documentation showing that Priscilla Blackthorne's event planning business has made $17,000 in political contributions to your campaigns over the past 3 years. She opened the box like a prosecutor presenting murder evidence. I also have records showing that her brother-in-law, Marcus Blackthorne, received 2 no-bid legal contracts from the county worth $63,000 since 2022. The documentary filmmaker, an intense woman named Maria Santos, positioned herself for the perfect shot as Mrs. Kowalski continued her evidence presentation. Commissioner Duffy, your husband's construction company received the contract for Willowbrook Street improvements, a project that conveniently required easement access through properties that Priscilla was trying to force into foreclosure. While the political circus performed in my driveway, Jake completed the most beautiful piece of investigative theater I'd ever witnessed. His excavation crew had discovered that my septic system showed clear evidence of contamination from unauthorized commercial food service, because apparently hosting catered events for 200 people without proper waste management permits creates actual health hazards. Mr. Brewster, Jake announced loudly enough for the news cameras to capture. This property is officially red tagged for potential contamination. No commercial activities can be permitted until full environmental remediation is completed. The building inspector, a 20-year municipal veteran who clearly despised political interference with his job, added his own devastating assessment. This residential foundation shows stress fractures consistent with repeated heavy equipment loads. Commercial event hosting on this property would violate every structural safety code in the county. But the real masterpiece was the health department's findings. Dr. Patricia Moore, the county health director, emerged from her inspection carrying soil samples and wearing the expression of someone who discovered a cholera outbreak. I'm declaring this property temporarily uninhabitable due to groundwater contamination risks from unpermitted commercial food service operations, she announced. Anyone attempting to host events here could face criminal charges for endangering public health. The smell of political careers dying, mixed with morning coffee, as 5 elected officials realized they'd just defended criminal activity on live television, while interfering with legitimate public health investigations. Commissioner Walsh attempted one final save. This is clearly an orchestrated attack on hard-working business owners who contribute to our community. Reporter Ryan's response was surgical in its precision. Commissioner, are you saying that documented fraud should be ignored because the perpetrator contributes to political campaigns? The sound of expensive shoes retreating across gravel at maximum speed provided the perfect soundtrack as Priscilla's political cavalry abandoned the battlefield faster than French infantry at Waterloo. Standing on my porch, watching elected officials flee from reporters while municipal inspectors completed their documentation of systematic fraud, I realized something profound. Corruption only survives in darkness. The moment you shine enough light on it, even the most powerful people run for cover. The first wedding guests were arriving in 15 minutes to find their venue had become a hazardous waste site, surrounded by government officials and news cameras. At exactly 9 a.m., the first wedding guests arrived to find Jake's demolition crew positioning a massive excavator directly over what used to be Priscilla's permanent wedding infrastructure. She'd spent 2 years illegally installing concrete platforms, permanent tent anchors, and even an unauthorized outdoor kitchen facility on my property. All without permits, all without permission, all about to become expensive rubble. The bride's family Mercedes pulled into my driveway just as Jake fired up the hydraulic systems with a diesel roar that rattled windows 3 houses away. The bride stepped out in her $1,000 dress to witness the excavator's massive claw hovering over the concrete wedding platform, where she was supposed to say her vows in 20 minutes. "Excuse me," the bride's father shouted over the engine noise, waving his arms at Jake. "We're here for the Peterson-Wilson wedding. What's happening to our venue?" Jake, wearing his official municipal emergency demolition hard hat, consulted his clipboard with theatrical precision. "Sir, we're removing unauthorized structures that pose immediate safety hazards to public gatherings. County Order 847B requires immediate demolition of unpermitted commercial installations." That's when Priscilla arrived in her white BMW, screeching to a halt just as the excavator's claw took its first massive bite out of her concrete wedding platform. The sickening crack of reinforced concrete splitting mixed with her scream of pure financial agony as $8,000 worth of illegal infrastructure turned into expensive gravel. "Stop! You can't destroy my venue improvements," she shrieked, running toward the excavator in designer heels and a cream-colored suit that was about to get very dusty. Reporter Sarah Ryan materialized with her cameraman, capturing the beautiful irony of a fraud perpetrator watching her stolen assets get legally demolished on live television. "Ms. Blackthorne, can you explain why you built permanent commercial structures on property you don't own?" Priscilla's response was pure panic-induced confession. "I invested $12,000 in those platforms. I have contracts. I have bookings. You're destroying a legitimate business." Jake's crew had choreographed the demolition for maximum psychological impact. The excavator methodically destroyed each unauthorized structure, while wedding guests watched in horrified fascination. The permanent tent anchors that had supported dozens of fraudulent events got ripped from the ground like weeds. The illegal outdoor kitchen facility, complete with gas lines that violated every safety code in the book, got reduced to twisted metal and broken dreams. But the real visual masterpiece came when Jake positioned the excavator to demolish the decorative wedding arch that Priscilla had permanently installed without permission. The massive machine delicately grasped the white lattice structure like a mechanical hand picking up a flower, then crushed it into splinters, while 200 wedding guests watched their venue disappear in real time. The bride started crying with the intensity of someone watching their entire future collapse into a gravel pile. Her father turned to the news cameras with the shell-shocked expression of complete financial devastation. "We paid $15,000 for this venue," he said, voice hollow with disbelief. "She stole our daughter's wedding day." That's when County Inspector Rodriguez emerged from his vehicle, carrying the demolition orders that made everything perfectly legal. "Ladies and gentlemen, these structures were built without permits on private property, without owner consent. Under County Code 847B, illegal commercial installations must be removed immediately to prevent public safety hazards." Priscilla made one final, desperate attempt to save her criminal empire. "You can't prove those structures weren't authorized. I have documentation. I have legal rights." Mrs. Kowalski stepped forward with her surveyor's equipment and the original property boundaries that destroyed Priscilla's last defense. "Ms. Blackthorne, every structure you built is 18 inches inside Mr. Brewster's property line. You literally built commercial facilities on stolen land." Jake saved the best for last. The excavator's massive claw reached for the centerpiece of Priscilla's fraud operation, a permanent concrete bar and serving station that had hosted dozens of illegal events. The machine lifted the entire structure, held it suspended for a dramatic moment while everyone watched, then dropped it onto the pile of rubble with a crash that echoed across 3 subdivisions. Detective Santos arrived with arrest warrants just as the last piece of unauthorized infrastructure turned into expensive gravel. "Priscilla Blackthorne, you're under arrest for construction fraud, theft of property improvements, and operating illegal commercial facilities." The handcuffs clicking shut, mixed with the sound of the excavator's engine winding down, as 47 neighbors applauded the most spectacular demolition of criminal activity in county history. Standing on my porch, watching Priscilla get loaded into a police car while her illegal wedding venue became a pile of expensive rubble, I realized the beautiful truth about justice. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to tear it down completely and start over with honest foundations. The bride's family drove away to find a legitimate venue, taking with them a story about the day their wedding became evidence in a fraud trial. But my tomatoes, still standing perfectly healthy in their original location, exactly where they'd been for 75 years before Priscilla decided to steal my backyard. 2 weeks later, Priscilla Blackthorne sat in county jail on $50,000 bail, facing 14 felony charges that would make a mob lawyer proud. Commercial fraud, theft by deception, operating unlicensed businesses, tax evasion, insurance fraud, and my personal favorite, conspiracy to commit organized theft using official authority. Marcus Blackthorne discovered that defending family members in criminal cases while facing your own embezzlement charges creates what lawyers call insurmountable conflicts of interest. The state bar suspended his license pending investigation, and he suddenly found himself too broke to afford the kind of defense attorney who could have saved Priscilla from serious prison time. The financial justice was swift and beautiful. Seized assets from Priscilla's fraud operation provided full restitution to 17 defrauded couples, plus interest and legal fees. The Peterson family got their $15,000 back, and enough extra compensation to afford a legitimate venue for their daughter's rescheduled wedding. Mrs. Patterson recovered the $3,400 she'd paid in fraudulent pergola fines, plus damages for emotional distress. The HOA dissolved faster than sugar in hot coffee once residents discovered how their dues had funded systematic harassment of their neighbors. We reformed as the Willowbrook Neighbors Association with a simple charter: maintain common areas, organize block parties, and never again tolerate anyone using community authority for personal profit. Our first unanimous vote? Electing Mrs. Kowalski as president, since anyone who could expose municipal corruption with a surveyor's transit obviously had the skills to manage neighborhood affairs honestly. The monthly meetings moved to rotating houses with actual potluck dinners instead of Priscilla's corporate theater presentations. Average attendance jumped to 42 residents, who actually enjoyed spending time together without someone lecturing them about property values and community standards. My backyard became the site of genuine community events, hosted with permission and joy instead of fraud and extortion. The Peterson family asked to hold their rescheduled wedding on my property, legitimately this time, and 200 guests celebrated love instead of documenting criminal evidence. The bride's thank you note made me tear up. Mr. Brewster, thank you for saving our family from financial ruin and giving us a wedding story we'll actually want to tell our grandchildren. Jake's excavation company received so much positive publicity from the fraud exposure that his business doubled overnight. Apparently, people like hiring contractors who use heavy machinery to fight corruption instead of just moving dirt around. The state legislature passed the Willowbrook Act, requiring HOAs to disclose all commercial activities and prohibiting board members from using community resources for personal businesses. County prosecutors now have a specific legal framework for investigating HOA corruption, and 3 other subdivisions have already requested audits based on our precedent. The community voted to use Priscilla's seized assets to establish the Willowbrook Veterans Memorial Garden in the subdivision's common area. Mr. Rodriguez designed a memorial honoring local military families, with an annual scholarship fund for veterans' children pursuing construction trades or municipal service careers. The memorial dedication brought together 93 residents for the largest community gathering in subdivision history. Even former enemies worked side by side, planting memorial roses and installing commemorative benches. 6 months later, I found myself speaking at county HOA reform meetings, helping other subdivisions identify corruption and implement transparency measures. My construction background turned out to be perfect for explaining how financial accountability works to residents who'd never read a budget spreadsheet. The relationship with my daughter's family grew stronger through the ordeal. My grandson now spends weekends learning construction skills, while I teach him the difference between building things and tearing down corruption. Both valuable life skills in their own way. Last Saturday, a young couple from 2 streets over asked permission to hold their small wedding ceremony in my backyard. 50 community members attended as genuine guests. Mrs. Kowalski catered with her famous Polish pierogi, and everyone celebrated love without lawyers, fraud, or excavation equipment. From the county jail, Priscilla watched the news coverage on the common room television, probably wondering how her perfect criminal empire had collapsed so spectacularly.